Can all join palms and repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here on this Wednesday evening. I had this funny thought, like at this moment where I'm filling in for Tina, who's gone back home for probably 6-7 weeks, and Bob's going to run a 6-week course on Wednesday nights on insight meditation. He's really wonderful, and that'll start next week. So I'm filling in, the gap in between. And I had this funny thought. This all happens really quickly. It's just how my mind works. If you just watch your thoughts. I had this funny thought that said, I'm filling in and I didn't prepare because it's not my night. And then the immediate thought after that was, well, wait a minute, you don't prepare when it is your night. So how is this any different from those nights? But it is different for some reason. It felt different. So it's really interesting how our minds can get stuck in these grooves. And often I use the metaphor when you're driving and the 12 days of rain we get in San Diego, and you see all the raindrops on the dashboard. If you grew up watching Price is Right, you can also use that Plinko game as an example, right? And so the raindrops are they hit the windshield and they haven't really found a home yet. And then once they hit the streaks, it's just boom, it's gone. Kind of like the Plinko thing, although it never really hits the streak until all the way at the bottom. And that's what happens with our minds, conditional patterns and behaviors, is that we just get stuck in these tracks. And all of our cravings, desires, addictions, habitual patterns that are healthy and unhealthy, really, are the same thing. We've just created this groove in our brain over and over and over again. And this practice of present time awareness and learning to be with life as it arises is really shattering all of those grooves, because when you are just defaulting to one of those grooves, you're not actually present. And what I mean by that is, for me, if I'm making my offering, doesn't matter if it's Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, doesn't matter if it's 7 o'clock at night, if it's 2 a.m, you're just present with that experience. And you're not comparing it to anything. And for me as a practitioner, it's every day incredibly important to watch your mind, because that's what this practice is. It is watching your mind. And of course, we will explore, when I say we, I mean the big collective Buddhist we. We will explore lots of stuff in Buddhism, different practices, different approaches, different teachers, different meditations. But all of them ultimately come down to, are you watching the nature of your mind and what your mind does? And if you do that, it really creates space for you to change these patterns that you fall into. And very often we don't even know that we're in these patterns because we're just so used to them. All right? just so used to waking up and thinking like, well, today's gonna suck. And we kind of go from there, right? It's almost like we're fighting to save each day before we've even gotten to 9 a.m. yet, or whatever pattern you fall into. So I don't know, just watch your mind, watch what it does. But yeah, it's good to sit with you all in this moment, which apparently is a Wednesday night. So thanks for being here. Normally I would start with meditation, and welcome to those virtual. Thanks for showing up. Sorry for those who thought you were getting Bettina and you got me, and sorry for those who thought you were getting Bob and you got me. The smaller group here, we've had a lot of guests recently from different Buddhist traditions. Really some of the, interestingly enough, the Korean Zen master we have, Venerable Pomyen Sundam, he's like the Dalai Lama in Korea. The Lama we just had, the Dalai Lama picked him as like this really special Lama. These are some pretty remarkable people. And it can also be really confusing sometimes. Because Buddhism is newer to a lot of people. So I actually had the intention when I was walking in here a few minutes before that I would just kind of start with like, are there any questions about what you all saw? And I don't mean necessarily like some teaching that they gave that I'm going to put a different spin on. I mean, just a question around like, what is all this? They're so different. Yeah.
I had a question about the different titles.
Yeah.
So what is a venerable, like what is that? Is that specific to a tradition, and what is that? How is that compared to the Lama?
Yeah, yes. The question around what is venerable compared to say in a specific tradition compared to say a Lama
or sensei
or Tuku or Rinpoche.
Yeah.
There are, and I surely couldn't even give you the breakdown of every single one, but what I can tell you is that yes, they are specific to traditions. Very often, the Taiwanese, Chinese, Korean, you'll hear venerable in English as kind of like a teacher, admiration, respect title before their name. You'll often hear in the Japanese tradition, you'll hear sensei, like teacher used, more so probably than you would hear venerable in the Japanese tradition. In the Tibetan tradition, you'll hear Rinpoche, you'll hear, when people say like my Rinpoche, well, Rinpoche, there's lots of Rinpoches. Rinpoche is like a teacher, right? So it could be so-and-so Lama, and then someone would refer to them as their Rinpoche, their teacher. That's always a safe kind of, if you're not sure of how to pronounce their names, you just refer to them as Rinpoche, right? And each tradition is going to be different with like, I don't want to put them as like rankings, yeah, but some of them are, yeah, some of them there are hierarchies, titles, reference specific ways as to like what level they're at, and there isn't really like a uniform answer because each culture will do it differently, for sure. And interestingly enough, the great ones, pretty much all of them that are out there, they're not wrapped up in their titles, obviously, even, I don't know if you caught it, but when at the very end last night, when I came up and I said, his comment about if you've met somebody once in your life, then I thought that was a really beautiful teaching. It really resonated with me. So, but if you've met somebody just once in your life, then they are immediately your friend. And I thought that was such like just a pleasant, beautiful way to hear that teaching. Because very often when we meet somebody, right, it's, do I like them? Do I not like them? What do they do for me? What am I going to do for them? There's this very transactional kind of judgmental critique or view wrapped up in observing somebody we meet for the first time. And I love the way he just said, if you met someone they're your friend. But my point was when I said that to him, and then out of respect, I wanted to say, now that I've met you, you are my friend, I'm my teacher, and he immediately shot down the teacher thing. So there's a humility there that's really beautiful amongst them that I always really admire. Yeah. So we just write a book on like the different titles of different Buddhist traditions. Yeah.
Is there anything as far as regarding time or creation or end of time? Is there any stuff like that
In Buddhism?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was, is there anything regarding time and creation, the endless, the age-old question of like where did we come from, stuff like that. There is. There is and there isn't. What I mean by that is, so there's a 4th century philosopher, Nagarjuna, and often he's considered one of the wisest next to the Buddha, right? And in his book, the text, the teaching is called Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. If you ever want to like get into some heavy stuff that's really gonna mess with your grind up here and like really make you like, what, it's like Freud type stuff, but on steroids. And but very simply, the teaching is no beginning, no end. You can't have something come from nothing.
Right.
So a lot of the great teachers that I've always respected and admired around that question would always default to that teaching to say, you can't have something come from nothing. So you can kind of, from that, pull out, well, something had to be an endless continuation, not a creation.
Right.
Because to create something means you've created something from nothing. And
So there's no, is it like Judeo-Christian? In the beginning there was God and creation, and then the end of times and stuff, but there's no dogma like that or any.
there is no beginning of time and there is no ending of time. Ultimately, there's not even time. So, no beginning time, no end time, and no time. So if you have no time, you can't have beginning of time and you can't have end of time. Ultimately, Buddhist teachings are, it's all an illusion. All of that is some construct. And the challenge is we're going to sit here with these intellectual minds and use our understanding of what we think time and space is, and then try to use that kind of intellectual knowledge, or at least our self-perceived intellectual knowledge, and use that to try to decipher these types of questions. But a lot of expressions in Buddhism really are beyond time, beyond space, right? Beyond all directions. No time, no space, no directions. Just endless continuation of consciousness and present moment. And if you can begin to even fathom what that is, to me, I think it's been very helpful in understanding that there isn't this what's next? Very often there's this crunch to I got to do whatever before I die, because then what's next? Rebirth, afterlife, heaven, hell, where, right? But all of that is just this massive construct in our head that we're trying to solve the age-old question. So, yeah, no beginning, no end, no time.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How does Buddhism define consciousness? I mean, that's been racking my brain for a while.
Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah, there's a lot of times around this question of no harming and the precept of to refrain from harming. Often people say refrain from killing, but it's really refrain from doing harm. And the teachings are anything with consciousness, right? So then the question is, what is consciousness? I don't know. Yeah. It's above my pay grade.
I think it's above everyone.
Yeah. Anything else on just anything that's on your mind before we sit on the different traditions or things you've seen even just in the last few days? Yeah.
One other thing about related to titles is the education. A lot of them have alluded to
Yes.
their education that they've received some in universities, some in monasteries. Is there like a standardized education that?
So, yeah, the question on education, and there are, and again, I've never studied like the titles of Tibetan, lamas and things like that, but I am 99.9% certain that some of the titles are directly related to education. So thank you for even pointing that out. One thing I'm also very aware of is that in especially Tibetan Buddhism, the education is incredibly important. And I mean, as Rinpoche said last night, he started in the monastery when he was 2. And he's been, educated for the last 30 years on many things, including Buddhist teachings. But very often you'll see monks and nuns and lamas and things like that with traditional PhDs. I've seen actually some nuns out there that'll have like Venerable so-and-so with a like PhD after it, which seems kind of interesting to see like a Buddhist nun or monk with like a PhD, but they've done the work, they got their letters, and they're proud of that. But Tibetans, the education is strong, and their intellectual knowledge is like, it's mind-blowing. It's so vast. And so there are titles that correlate with that directly as well.
And that knowledge is both of Buddhism and other.
Everything, exactly, yeah. Languages and lots of stuff. And his English was actually, when I was walking out with them, and I said, your English is pretty good. And then we had a whole conversation in English walking out. So it's always very often for people where it's not their native language, it's like that fear of, speaking that language. But we had a cute little conversation just from the door to the van door in English, of him telling me how poor his English was, and I understood everything he said walking out to the door. So, but yeah, their education is strong. But I'll do a little research on, like, especially within Tibetan, you can just Google it, but because I'm curious too, specifically how that lines up. Yeah.
When you say you're very educated, is it mostly institutions, or is it also like certain senseis and certain types of small experts or
Sure.
teachers like that?
It's a combination of both, and I think it varies from culture to culture. Very often you have, in Asian cultures, you'll have, you could have, whether it's Tibetan or, other Asian cultures where maybe they're coming from areas and regions that there's not a lot of education. And so the education maybe will come from within the monastery. Then you'll have, I know the monastery I was at, they actually had there an accredited university in Taiwan as well as the United States here as well. And so they'll send them for, 4-year degrees, as well as, masters and PhDs in, could be Buddhism, could be in whatever. Very often you'll also have a lot of monks and nuns that have become ordained as monks and nuns later in life. So they've already gone through their, their childhood and their college and their university life. Maybe they were married, maybe they had children, whatever it might be, and then they decided to spend the last 25 years of their life ordained as a nun or a monk. So you'll see that. I saw that a lot in Taiwan, where people ordained much later in life, and so they already had, a degree in accounting, and now they're a Buddhist nun. So you'll see stuff like that as well. But in Tibetan monasteries, much of that education is in the monastery itself, but then also could be through outside institutions. But a lot of it, I think, is financial as well. And if they have the financial means to attend certain universities or institutions like that. And a lot of it, I think I've seen it more and more, but especially around kind of engaged Buddhist practice, Mahayana tradition, Tibetan, really Vajrayana, but still Tibetan tradition, you'll see they want them to be educated because they're engaging in the world. And the world is a mess, in case we haven't figured that out yet. So modern day, they're not just looking for so much monks or nuns to just like sit and hide out, but imagine if you had this like ultimate wisdom, like just such an intense level of wisdom. You want that in the world. We need that in the world, really. So, yeah.
One more question.
Yeah, and then we'll say, go ahead.
It seems like a lot of the talks and a lot of topic that comes up frequently is climate change.
Yeah.
Is that in just, I guess, more broadly in Buddhism, kind of a core focus in terms of like doing good in the world and helping to spread the message of like preservation?
I think you're seeing it a lot more. I know going back 20 years ago, no matter what Buddhist thing I went to or talk I went to or temple I went to, there was not one single mention of climate change around the Buddhist world, right? But you look to today and you see all of these problems in the world, and I think it's scientists and the great leaders of the world are actually turning to Buddhists, the great Buddhist leaders, more and more because they see the wisdom they have. So then, and this is just obviously always my opinion, then they think, okay, well, how can we apply this wisdom to things like climate change to make an impact in the world? So you're seeing a lot of this kind of the social, economic, environmental, political injustice that's in our world today. You're seeing, I think, more and more Buddhists engaging in those dialogues and conversations because that's what we're doing.
And now there's just a name to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So the more smart people we have addressing what's going on in the world, we're better off. So, all right. So we'll do some meditation. I don't want anyone to be too disappointed here. So find a position that's comfortable for you. As always, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to float. You're not going to have any magical experiences. We're just going to sit and breathe. I'll guide us gently at the beginning, and then we'll settle into silence. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. Start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually, just settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice. Observing sensation of breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from the practice, just sitting, breathing. With the body still, rested. And
the speech quiet, aware of all sounds. In the mind, learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. So how do you all feel right about now? Peaceful. What else? Relaxed. What else?
Aware I've been carrying a lot of tension around and stuck in my head.
The last part, on top of your head or in your head?
Stuck in my head.
Stuck in your head.
Yeah.
What else?
I just think, good, bad, who knows?
That'll work. How did that stuff get stuck in your head?
Loaded question.
Well, you only got about 15 minutes left, so, Where did it come from?
I guess, I can only speak from my experience, but I think I've always prioritized thoughts as reality. And I tend to fall back into that when I feel stress or have difficult emotions. And I notice that a lot when I'm meditating, that it'll take a long time to sort of settle out behind it, or even I can't sometimes. It's sort of where I find myself living. So where did it come from? Couldn't tell you.
You can't tell me?
Conditioning, phenomenons of molecules, my brain, I don't know.
Who put it there?
My experiences, people I've interacted with.
Couldn't have been you, right?
Could have been me, sure.
I mean, nobody else put those thoughts in your head.
No.
Who made you feel peaceful?
Who made me? It was myself.
Yourself. Who you stuck with all day long, like it or not, no offense, I know you're great. Who are you with all day long?
Myself.
How often do you feel peaceful?
A couple of times a day.
That's good. That's more than most admit to. That's why he's in the front row, just so you all know. Who made you feel calm?
Got into a good rhythm of the breath. Was able to not be scattered everywhere. When I was, come back. It was kind of reassuring.
Yeah. Good response. And if the question was, what made you feel calm, that would have been accurate. The question of who made you feel calm?
It's got to be me.
Gotta be you, right? What you just described, rhythm of the breath, got scattered, came back. You can do that all day. At work, with all the stress, with all the chaos, with everything. It is possible. It's not easy. But it's interesting that when I said, who made you feel calm, and you went to describe what it was that made you feel calm. And that action of the rhythm of the breath, lost focus and came back. We have the ability to do that all day. Not easy, that's why we're here doing this practice. But ultimately, it doesn't matter if we're sitting here in the Dharma Bum temple, if we're sitting on the beach, if we're sitting at work with a million people yelling at us or expecting things from us. It's the simple fact of staying with the breath and present on a task that creates the calmness without the stories attached to it. Super hard to practice. But intellectually, there's no difference in, or experientially, there's no difference in sitting here than in anything else you're doing. It's just this illusion of yourself and your breath.
But if I'm at work and I'm concentrated on a task that takes my full mental attention, I think it's difficult to also be mindful of the breath at the same time. I don't think I could do that. I think I would have to be focusing on a work assignment, or focusing on breathing, but not both.
Okay, so ultimately, focusing on the breathing, focusing on the work task, same thing. Because what is focusing on the breath?
Present.
The mind is where I was going, right? It's your mind using the breath to focus on. Your mind using the work to focus on. Still your mind. What makes the workplace so stressful is there's all kinds of stories around it. Deadlines, expectations, responsibilities, goals, just everything that comes with work. But your mind focused on, the Zen practice is a single-minded focus. We often say things like use the breath. The breath is always there. The Buddha said to focus on the breath. You could focus on a candle. You could focus on a shoe, a bottle of water. You could focus on your work. Single-minded focus is single-minded focus. Present time awareness, as they call it. So, again, just planting the seeds that ultimately you can just crank away at work just as peaceful as you crank away at the Dharma Bum temple. Give it time. But once we begin to understand that we don't have to go anywhere to feel that sense of calm and that sense of peace and that sense of being okay, this is what it means to bring practice into your everyday life. Because then nothing bothers you. Like literally nothing. It doesn't mean you don't still get a lot done. It doesn't mean you're not still like, work getting through it. But nothing bothers you. You're fine. Yeah.
So, in my workplace, I work from home, and I use, in the past, I've used a lot of profanity, and stuff is not going my way.
You say in the past you use a lot of profanity?
Well, that's the thing.
Like this morning past, or?
Because today, and recently, I've noticed myself, swearing or this, but I'm not really that upset. And I think it's the habit of doing it because I'm like, expletive this or expletive that. But
Yeah.
you know what? I'm not really that upset about it. I'm like, okay, I just got to do the next indicated thing.
Yeah.
But so you said in the beginning, or you talked about in the beginning, that I'm paraphrasing, the patterns that we're in that we keep doing over and over, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm swearing about this, because I'm just going to do the next thing, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I'll do my best, and come what may. But I'm in that pattern of,
Yeah.
swearing at everything, but it's not even upsetting me anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. I swear someday I'm going to write a book titled When I Came Back from the Monastery. But when I came back from the monastery, one of the things that I noticed it there, but it was super glaring when I came back. But I just had spent 11 months in an environment where I didn't hear one swear word. It was probably 6 months in before I realized that. And then it was really odd. And then when I came back, it actually sounded like gross, like harsh. I mean, I've been swearing it was probably the third word out of my mouth when I was, I've been swearing since I was born. And then it became really like harsh and ugly because I just didn't hear it for so long. And that stuck with me for a little while. And then it faded away and I just fell back into, but similar to what you're saying, which is why I kind of related to it, it's like the language is there, the words are there, but the feeling of that disgust or hatred or anger, what would often stir those words out, they weren't there. That wasn't there. The words are there, but they're coming from a different place. They're almost just coming from this place of, well, these are just the words I'm supposed to use right now, because if I use this word, then people will really listen.
Well, I'm talking to myself, so I don't know how.
Yeah, I can't go there. Yeah. But we fall into these patterns. Were you gonna ask? Oh, Betty.
I was gonna ask, while you're meditating, sometimes to help pull myself back, I don't know what it's called, have a chant that somebody taught me once. Like, is it okay or is that using your mind too much and not focusing on the present?
Yeah, totally. So a chant or a mantra or something like that. I'm a big fan of never thinking that things that you do during meditation or little techniques, I'm a fan of them all being wonderful. Not a fan of saying like, oh, this is bad or wrong, right? If 100 people lead you meditation, they're going to lead you 100 different ways. And we like different foods, we like different people, we like different places. We're going to like different meditations and different meditation techniques. So if it's beneficial for you, absolutely use it. If you have a chant or mantra or a word or whatever it is that brings you back to the present moment, it's a wonderful practice. To answer your question directly, yes, you're still using that thinking mind to come back to the present moment, but it's still a good practice. It is one of the reasons a lot of people use chants or prayers or mantras, and really, again, we don't do this here at the Dharma Bump Temple, but just about any other Buddhist temple in the world you go to, they're going to be chanting. And the chanting, all their chanting for the most part is actually Buddhist sutras. So for those who maybe don't understand the language that it's being chanted in, it sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like, a song or something like that, but they're actually just reciting Buddhist sutras. So if you heard it in your language, it doesn't sound all that great. But when they do it, it sounds like this, like, oh, it's so, mystical and blah, blah, blah. They're just reciting Buddhist sutras. And that in and of itself is a meditative practice. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, it can be a beautiful technique to use.
Thank you.
Yeah. I remember my master saying it didn't matter if you recite the Buddha's name or Coca-Cola. If it brings you back to the present moment, then you're in the present moment. So, yeah. What else? Yeah.
I used to practice quite a bit a couple of years ago, and I had no trouble getting to kind of like a zero mind state. And the trick I used is I would categorize things as they came up, like work, relationship. But lately, it's been a stressful part of life, and I almost get the sense that when I can distract myself during the day, but when I go into meditation, it's just almost impossible not to have these kind of plinko grooves, or like just explode. And there's something in there that's kind of just like, oh, now that it's quiet, now you can really process this or something like that, and it's brutal.
Yeah.
It
Sitting
feels
is,
like it's suppressed.
sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Is that last part again?
It feels like it's opening the floodgates to things that are suppressed.
Yeah. Sitting in silence, and having worked with active and veteran, combat folks coming back, PTSD, TBI, traumatic brain injuries, things like that. That's a population, as many people may be in this room, any type of trauma that you've experienced, no matter how, time-wise, whether it was this morning, yesterday, 10 years ago, whatever, when you sit in silence, if that's what you're carrying, that's what you're stuck with. And that can be very painful, because in the situation you just described, yes, if you're emotionally, mentally carrying a lot in this stage of your life right now, you just want to stay busy, because then you're not thinking. You're just getting stuff done. So to the last part you said, that's almost kind of suppressing what's really going on. And then when you sit silently, the floodgates open, man. It's just like, I can't do this. I can't sit silently, because it's just hell. And there's probably moments where, you're here at home or wherever you're doing your meditation, all of a sudden you're sitting and you're like, I just can't sit like this anymore, because my head's going to explode. I need to go do something. Totally going to happen. And I would just chalk it up as sometimes you can sit with it and sometimes you can't. But I think it's important to understand that, as I used to tell the men and women I was working with, if you can't sit silently for 60 seconds, learn to do it for 30 seconds. If you can't do it for 30 seconds, learn to do it with 5 seconds. Because ultimately, we want to get to a place. It would be nice if we could get to a place where we could sit silently without feeling like our head's going to explode. And if we don't ever kind of take baby steps and sit with it, then we're never going to get through it. The other thing, though, I think is important to understand is that, and you said process, nothing wrong with sitting and processing life. But I would separate processing from trying to do it just a quiet, seated meditation. I think the example you gave of kind of categorizing it, I remember someone years ago, this is very common, you'll hear people talk about like envelopes, right? Somebody, thought arises, put it in an envelope, stamp it, seal it, send it off. Thought arises, imagine it's on an airplane, and just let it go. Thought arises, so you're constantly recognizing these thoughts and just sending them off, and that's great. But at some point, not in meditation, we want to understand what's really going on there. And we don't want to just suppress that stuff, because it's just going to keep coming up. So we have to face it, we have to deal with it, we have to process it, we have to get through it, we have to embrace it, we have to accept it, we have to feel it. But I also suggest we understand that it's done. It's already done. It's in the past, whatever it is. It has to be in the past. Otherwise, it wouldn't be showing up in your mind right now.
Because I find myself sitting there saying, I need to give the mind a break and just focus and get it to the zero mind. Like, this is the point of doing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, and then you weigh that against like processing. There's no answers to be found though. It's the same thoughts.
Sure, and I can understand that. What I'm suggesting is that don't use the goal of what you're calling the zero mind right now, because you're not there. You're in a place right now where you need to learn to be okay with your thoughts. So my suggestion is, instead of going into a meditation with this idea of what you think meditation is supposed to be like, and then it not being that, and then saying, well, I might as well just stop or whatever, just stay with it. Try not to run from it when you have those thoughts in meditation. Thoughts arise no matter how scary, no matter how dark, no matter how traumatic, no matter how angry they are. Just sit and breathe. Otherwise, we're just going to keep escaping from them.
Right.
Learn to be with the thoughts, and when you learn to be with them, you begin to understand they're in the past, what you're thinking about. You understand the impermanence of them, meaning it's done, and your thoughts will change. And feel that pain.
That's what's in the present.
Yeah, I know. But sometimes we have to feel it and cry it out and just like so raw with it to get through it. That's life. You know, it's the human experience of feeling that pain that we don't want to feel. We don't want to feel pain. But it's there. It's there. And it's okay to feel pain. First thing the Buddha said, life is filled with suffering. What are all of us trying to run away from? The dude was smart. Life is filled with suffering. But as soon as suffering arises, we're like, no, I don't want that. Give me all that other Buddhist stuff, you know? And we're like drinking the Kool-Aid on all the other Buddhist stuff because we don't want suffering. Be with the suffering. I get it, we're trying to end suffering, but we're a long ways away from that. A long ways away from ending suffering. Like, I don't know, at least 1,000 lifetimes. So, there's some, I'm not even sure how to express this really, but there's I'll kind of wrap up here, but there's this idea that I have a lot in a place like this, you know, where sometimes I have this feeling or this thought or this idea that, you know, Buddhism it's beautiful. I mean, it's an incredibly beautiful practice, and it is, you know, it's my life. But I also see sometimes it can almost be this thing that like we're leaning on too much, and we're thinking like Buddhism is going to make everything okay. And we're not just being with the pain. Don't always look for things to get fixed. Don't always think Buddhism or meditation is going to fix you or heal you. What Buddhism is saying is life is filled with suffering. Explore that, see that, and learn to minimize it. But I don't know that enough people are really ready to like just be with that pain. That is life. It's incredibly painful. And that's okay. It hurts, and that's okay. It sucks, but that's okay. So I'm going to close on that. On that happy note, I'm going to close with joint palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
You wanna do it?
They've all heard it.
They're all-
They've all heard it.